everybody. This video is why are you stuck? So if you've tried self-help, if you've tried self-improvement and it really hasn't worked for you, this video might be for you. Self-help can be deadly for the wrong person. I'm not totally hating on self-help. Can it work for the right person? Yeah, sure it can. But if you aren't the right person for it, which this video is addressing, it could really end up damaging you. So this is primarily for people that self-improvement has not worked for. So let me ask you a couple questions and see if they resonate with you. Have you tried multiple projects that you are interested in, but you still just could not follow through with them? Have you tried planners, to-do lists, tried to hype yourself up, and it just could not keep you going? Do you feel terrible inside for not being able to change your life or to improve on something? And despite that, you just cannot sustain any change. You know that you're not just lazy, but the gravity feels 100 times heavier in your mind. If any of that resonates with you, this video might be for you. So it is very likely it is not your fault. This is not a character flaw. And you very likely can do something about it. But first, we have to learn what it is. Okay, so to explain what it is that might have you stuck, I like to use analogies. I'm a visual learner, maybe it helps you, but the analogy I'm going to use is a parking brake. So we all probably know a parking brake is the lever between the seats in the car. You can pull it up and it clamps down on all the brakes that you would use in an emergency. And if you have the parking brake pulled up, it's going to stop your car. You're not going to be able to drive. If you go ahead and try to jam on the gas on the accelerator, it's going to damage your car. There's going to be smoke and sparks. It's not going to work out well. So do you have something deep inside you feel is holding back your progress? It almost feels like you're sabotaging yourself. Do you relate with that? Inside, do you just feel like you don't have the will to move? Does it feel like a bunch of fear or anxiety when you do try to make changes? Those feelings inside of me, I'm referring to as my parking brake. So our parking brake in this analogy is going to be either our trauma or unresolved issues that we may have. And in this analogy, the hitting on the accelerator on the gas is trying to do self-improvement or self-help. So if you have unresolved issues or you have trauma and you have your parking brake up, and you constantly are trying to do self-improvement or self-help, you're jamming on the accelerator, you can imagine that's not going to be good for you or the car, and a lot of smoke and sparks are going to be flying out, and it will do damage. So the only way to resolve this is to disengage the parking brake. Now, that's way easier said than done, and I'm not claiming it's not. But if you are suffering from a similar issue, it may be the only way for you to move forward. If you keep hitting the accelerator with the parking brake on, I mentioned it can do a lot of damage. There's false hope. You can set yourself up for thinking you're going to get something done, and when you don't, it actually hurts you a lot and sets you back further. You can feel defeated and you can feel defective. None of these things are good for you. Probably cut that. So what might be going on inside of you is very complicated. Like I mentioned, it could be trauma or unresolved issues. So the word trauma is very loaded. It sounds so dramatic. I really didn't like the word, and I still have some problems with it, but I'm coming to terms with it. So if that word just really sets you off and you don't like it, try to think of unresolved issues, or just try to bear with me so I can explain this out. The first definition I want to put up is the most common definition for trauma. Trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Reactions such as shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms. So as you can see by that definition we're all probably used to, it's super dramatic. It's what most people think of when they think of the word trauma. Let me show you another definition. Psychological trauma is damage to a person's mind as a result of one or more events that caused overwhelming amounts of stress that exceed the person's ability to cope or integrate the emotions involved, eventually leading to serious, long-term negative consequences. I like this one better, especially for this conversation, because you can see it's a little bit more general and it's a little bit more subjective of how each individual feels. So with the second definition and what we're going to talk about today, it's really important to remember it's not so much what the person went through, but how you perceived it as an individual. Two people can go through the exact same scenario, and since we're different, it can affect them very differently. What is just a really scary moment for one kid could be a life or death existential moment or memory in another child. And even though you definitely can have trauma as an adult, I'm talking a little bit more about children right now, but it does apply. Kids have no defenses. And where trauma can be huge and dramatic, like the first definition, it also can be slow, stagnant, and sneaky. And it could be from neglect. So something sneaky in the background like neglect to a child can feel like life or death. Kids rely on adults for everything. When they're little, the adults in their life might as well be gods. The child brain, it's way too unsafe for the child to think anything that's going wrong that the adults are doing has to do with the adults. So it's very natural for the child to internalize the bad or messed up things that adults may be doing around them. Like an example of neglect, if you're not getting the attention that you very much need during your development, it may not be the adult's fault in the child's brain. They think it's something wrong with them, and they slowly internalize it over the years. Next, I'd really like to go back to the word trauma, because I don't know about you, but it was a bit of a problem for me at first. I'd like to address that a little bit. I really did not like admitting that I had deep trauma as a kid, and also I had some as an adult. It felt too dramatic, but the results were clear in my life. Also, through my childhood, my mom did the best that she was able to. So at first, it felt disrespectful or rude to even take that angle. But it wasn't about being mean to her. It had to be about honest self-inquiry to see what was inside of me. Why was I unhappy and why was I stuck? Another big reason I didn't like the dramatic sound of trauma is because of comparison to others. It's so natural to do. We evolved to be a super social creature, so it's nearly impossible to compare yourself when you're thinking about achievements, diet, exercise, anything really. But in terms of your experience, what you went through, it's almost impossible for us not to compare. You have to really try not to compare to others. Remember, it's not as much what you went through, but how it affected you. We all know someone who went through way worse things than we did, but that's not fair to look at it that way, because whatever happened to you, and it affected you the way it affected you. And if you compare your experience to others, you're really robbing yourself a chance to truly look at how things affected you. And just because someone else went through hell, it doesn't or shouldn't diminish your personal individual experience. Another reason I really didn't like admitting or talking about if I had trauma or unresolved issues, honestly, is societal indoctrination. So it's a hot topic about gender, masculinity, femininity, and I'm not here to get into that, but I was a child of the 80s and 90s. We got bullied a lot, and if you showed any weakness, you're a wimp, you're weak. So that was definitely a tough thing for me, and it definitely helped me hide a lot of feelings that I had. And in the end, one of the most vicious things that I realized is if you take all those reasons that I didn't like admitting I had trauma, in the end, I sort of indoctrinated myself. I talked myself out of thinking that I didn't have tough times or trauma. I didn't have it worse than this person. Once I indoctrinated myself, and I still felt terrible about some things in my life, and I wasn't able to look outside of myself for the reasons, in the end, I subconsciously just blamed it on myself. And I thought, well, it has to just be me then. And unfortunately, what that brought on was decades of self-hatred, depression, and self-medication. I don't know if anybody else can relate with that. Okay, in this next part, I'd like to tell you my story a little bit and see if that resonates with you as well. So I personally was very depressed. I hated myself, and I self-medicated a lot through most of my entire adult life. Approximately 5 years, I had what I call an awakening, and that word just works for me. It resonates with me. I can see how pretentious that could sound. So if you don't like the sound of that word, instead of awakening, you can think I felt very negative about my life and myself, but it was just below the surface. And 5 years ago, the dam finally broke, and I fully realized my mind and my life were not okay. Again, I do a shortcut and say I had an awakening. You might think, how can you go your entire adult life and not notice this? It's kind of like a fish in water. The fish was born in the water. It had been in the water its whole life. It had never been out of the water. So it's just part of its environment. It doesn't even know what water is. That was basically me and my unhappiness. And when I had my awakening 5 years ago, that was me finally realizing it at a more conscious level. So I do have to give a warning. When I first had my awakening, things definitely got a lot worse before they got better. All my bad feelings greatly increased for a while because I was finally noticing them for the first time. I developed insomnia. I was too inside my own head. I had a really rough couple of years. And that's one of the reasons that I really wanted to make this video. If I could bring this to anybody's attention or help them in any way, and they could avoid some of what I went through, it'd be really meaningful. So when I had my awakening, another tough part was I realized I had wasted so many years and I wanted to do something about it. So I desperately started trying to improve my life and try little projects and such. That's when I started consuming a lot of self-help, but I didn't realize the internal problems, the trauma or the unresolved issues. I was trying super hard to hit that accelerator on my car all the time while that parking brake was up. And as you can imagine, it caused a lot of distress, a lot of issues, a lot of pain, a lot of failure. So the first couple of years, I would find a project that kind of interested me or excited me. I would start it up, and my personal cycle is for like 1 to 3 months. I would work on this project, I'd get into it, learn it, try to set it up, whether it was business or passive income, and then inevitably, I would find a reason to burn out or find excuses not to continue with it. Maybe I'd say it was too hard, or I really didn't think it was gonna work, or the shiny object syndrome, where I'm working on one thing and I hit a wall because I have the unresolved issues, and then I see another project over here and I go, oh, whoa, no, let me go try that. That happened a lot as well. As I mentioned along the way, not only did I try these multiple projects for self-help and self-improvement, I started to consume a lot of self-help. I'll admit at this point, I probably had a self-help addiction. I call that the self-help cyclone, and I did make a video of that, so I will link it in the description below. It's worth checking out. Because I kept hitting the accelerator of self-improvement and self-help, while I still had the parking brake of trauma and unresolved issues, I was doing a lot of damage to myself because I was inevitably going to have problems and fail on these things, and it just hurt my psyche more and more and more. Instead of when you fail when you don't have this issue, you can learn and take something from it and grow, which I knew in my brain that that's how it's supposed to be, but in my emotions and my heart and my gut, I didn't realize that, and it was just reflecting poorly back on me and hurting me in many ways. So kind of summarize the first section, this is why self-help can be really dangerous or really deadly if you're not the right person for it and if you have this parking brake on. Let me know below if any of this resonates with you, because it was a real big light bulb moment for myself. Okay, so in this last part, nobody likes to hear doom and gloom problems without a suggestion, right? And this isn't a magic wand or a magic bullet. I can't tell you what works or doesn't work, but I can give you a couple hints of maybe what I've been working on and what's been resonating for me, and maybe if you want to, you can look into it. So I tried so many times to do projects and self-improvement and self-help outside of myself, I had to finally turn inward. I've been working with a therapist for over 7 months now, trying to actually take a strong look at those unresolved issues or trauma inside of myself and trying to work on releasing the parking brake. I do feel like I am making a lot of progress during this time. The jury's still out, I'm not gonna lie. It's gonna need more time and more work, but so far, I'm pretty optimistic about what I've seen. And then here's another side note, if this resonates with anybody, just like the folks that might not like the word trauma so much, I'm actually a big believer in therapy. I think it's really great. I don't have a problem with it. And even despite that, I held off a long time before I went to therapy. It's kind of a pain to start the process and look for a therapist. I could make another video on that. But the only thing I think now is I really, really wish I would have started earlier. So if you're not sure, or even if you're on the fence about it, you should really strongly consider doing it. You can only resolve so much stuff with what you have in your own head, and to get it out and talk to somebody that might have training can be really helpful. So again, I can only mention what I'm working on and what might be worth you looking into. I've tried a couple of different programs, and the one that seems to be resonating with me personally and you could look into is called IFS, Internal Family Systems. So there is a good book that you can read. No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz, The Internal Family Systems Model. I'll put a link in the description below. I want to give a warning though. Funny enough, the system is 40 years old. so about as old as I am. It's got some really great ideas in it, but the book is not so good, which may sound funny. This is a very different way to look at problems inside of yourself, and the language is going to be maybe very alien to some people. Also, some of the language might be a little cringy, I'm not going to lie. But the concepts and what you do, especially working with a therapist is really recommended, can really change the way you look at yourself and how you feel. Also, lastly, I'm not interested in any of my videos being political, but the author is brilliant, but he does put some political language in it that could turn many people off, so that's just one warning. Another alternative, the creator of IFS has been on multiple podcasts, and I do love listening to podcasts, and he had a pretty good podcast with Tim Ferriss. I'll link that in the description below as well. If you want an alternative, that's a pretty good listen, and you'll get an idea of the gist of what the system is, and none of the weird kind of political stuff comes into it. He just tells the facts. And again, I've tried a couple of different systems, and this is the first one that's really resonated with me. It's not perfect, nothing is, but it gave a really new, interesting way to look at unresolved issues and how they may be holding you back and being a parking brake. I'll probably make another video explaining what I think about internal family systems or IFS and kind of what I've discovered that might be interesting, but that'll be for another video. All right, well, I really appreciate you watching. Hopefully this resonated with somebody out there. This took me a lot of painful years to kind of figure out that I had a parking brake on and I was hitting the accelerator. So if any of this resonated with you, hopefully you can take some of the words and some of the advice in there and save yourself a couple of years, honestly. If you'd like to join Sovereignty League, I'll put the description to the Discord down below. I'm trying to build a resource that I wish I had when I first started trying to improve myself. I'd like-minded people there that are wanting to improve. I want to build a community of open-minded folks that are at all different levels of improvement, from people that are just thinking about improving, people that have just awakened and they're in that raw, painful state, maybe some people that are further along that journey and they're struggling, or even all the way up to mentors that are beyond where I am. I would like to make the community that I wish I had when I first realized that I needed to improve my life and my mind. All right, thanks everybody, and until next time.